Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My presentation is titled Exploring the Double Edged Nature of Social Media During Student Athlete Injury Recovery and the Need for Digital Wellness. Um, this presentation is especially meaningful today because it is going to be released on World Mental Health Day. Today is a day to raise awareness, promote open conversations, and highlight the importance of mental well being. And over this presentation, I'm going to be walking you through some of the research that I conducted for my literature review, why this topic matters to me both on a personal and professional level, and then we'll explore just three digital wellness strategies that kind of came up in the research and how that can support student athletes during recovery. So, a little bit about me. I wanted to give you a sense of who I am as I wear a few different hats. So, I am a gym owner. I own CrossFit Berry with my husband. Um, I'm an educator at my local college. I teach both in the fitness and health promotion program. I teach fitness and wellness for first responders, paramedics, and I also teach fitness and wellness to the HVAC students. I'm an educator, so that is a really big part of my life. I am also a student, so currently completing my Master's of Education with the University of Ontario Tech. And I'm also an athlete, so I still compete in many sports, and we'll kind of dive into that in a second. These roles intersect every day in my life. They've shaped how I view mental health, they shape how I view digital wellness. And this research is personal for me because I've experienced firsthand the pressures of sport, the impact of injury, and the role that online spaces can play when you're in those vulnerable moments. So, growing up, sports was a huge part of my identity. I've played competitive soccer, basketball, swimming, any sport that the school was available to me, I played. And then when I went to university, I did play badminton. I was immersed in athletics from a very young age, and it kind of shaped how I saw myself and the world. It shaped who I became friends with, my community. A lot of my confidence was always built around sport. And this background is important for this research because it's exactly the kind of environment where identity and mental health can be deeply impacted, especially when injuries happen. I've experienced many injuries personally, so I know firsthand what it feels like to be sidelined, the frustration that comes with it, the loss of your routine, especially with training, the emotional toll it can also take. And that lived experience is a big part of why I chose to focus my research on this topic. So it's not just theoretical, but it's also something that I've lived. Athletics is has been a part of my life since I can remember, and I still compete till today. So I compete on an international stage in CrossFit, Olympic weightlifting. I dive into endurance events like triathlons, and I play on a lot of co-ed, just recreational sports. So I've played on a softball team this summer. I play on soccer teams, etc. Sports has given me so much. So it's given me community, it gives me structure, identity, but it's also shown me how things like an injury can be challenging physically and mentally. And this lived experience is part of why I felt compelled to explore this topic on a more deep level. So this is kind of just giving you a roadmap of how my paper was conducted. But what I'll do today is I'll start with the background, what my population focus was. I'll walk you through a little bit of my methodology, some key themes that emerged from the literature review and my research. And then I'll share three digital wellness strategies that address the double-edged role of social media in student athlete injury recovery. And we'll also examine some moderating factors that influences the strategy effectiveness depending on how you are. And then we'll wrap up with conclusions and some future directions for future research. So defining the population. So I researched adolescent students specifically, high school slash post-secondary. So somewhere between ages 14 to 24 years old. They had to have been obviously competing in organized sports at a competitive level. And these individuals spend a lot of their time training, right, for their sport. Their teammates may be some of their closest friends and peers. And the reason I chose adolescents, not only do I teach at a post-secondary level, but I also chose this group due to their high physical and psychological demands from sports, and coupled that with their high demands of academics. They also face unique challenges during their injury recovery stage due to their age and their life stage development. So, according to Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, adolescents navigate the identity versus role confusion stage. So, this is where they are trying to establish a clear sense of self and who they are. And many athletes identify themselves as an athlete, especially through their teen years. And sometimes that can lead to what we call identity foreclosure, which we'll talk about in a bit, where they may only see themselves as an athlete. So they don't see themselves as a brother, a sister, a friend, a cousin, or any other hobbies in their life. And they're kind of surrounded just by that sport. This population is also going to face unique challenges. So they have their competitive sports, their schedules, their training, their games, and then they also have academic responsibilities, and they're going through identity development. 90% of student athletes will experience at least one sport-related injury throughout their sports career, if not more. And injuries, what they do is they disrupt your routine, they may disrupt your identity, and they can really disrupt your overall well-being. And how social media plays into this is that it's going to play both a supportive but also a potentially harmful role while you're going through that injury recovery. Understanding the dual impact of social media on student athletes during injury recovery is very important for developing effective digital wellness strategies so we can help foster psychological resilience and overall well-being. So let's look into social media use. So currently, we are looking at a high usage across all platforms. So in this graph, we're looking at TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat. 95% of adolescents are using some kind of social media platform. And you can see that this is problematic throughout the years. So we have seen a rise in social media use in adolescents from 7% in 2018 to 11% in 2022 as being problematic and impacting their life. Social media is very prevalent in adolescent life, which is why I chose to include it. The purpose of my research was threefold. So first, to examine how social media impacts mental health during injury recovery. Second, I wanted to identify some effective digital wellness strategies. And then third, try to understand how these moderating factors influence how the strategies work in different contexts and for different athletes. And together, these objectives provide a foundation for practical interventions that can be applied in school, it could be applied in sports, it could be applied in clinical settings, and even some recommendations for the coaches and the parents. So here are my 3 research questions that kind of guided my literature review. So they focus on understanding both the risk and benefits of social media use, identifying variables that might shape athletes' experiences, and uncovering strategies that can actively support recovery online. These questions allowed me to systematically move from a problem identification to a solution-focused recommendation. So question number 1 is, what are the risks and benefits of social media for student athletes recovering from an injury? Number 2, what moderating factors should be considered when implementing digital wellness strategies for this group? And then what strategies can support a student athlete's injury recovery journey and their overall well-being? So my paper went over 20 articles. Some databases that I used to conduct the research was the Ontario Tech Library as well as Google Scholar. Some key search terms included student athlete, injury, social media, adolescent mental health, and digital wellness. And my articles were all selected based on peer-reviewed publications from 2015 to present, focusing on those adolescents that are aged 14 to 24, written in English, available as open text, full text articles. I also have some additional research from blogs or videos on social media from student athletes talking about their experience. So they may have not been peer-reviewed publication, but they were still there in the research that I did. And then I did a little bit of a thematic analysis just to find key themes throughout the articles, some patterns, some moderating factors, and then any research gaps. So I developed a chart of my 20 articles that summarized the key findings of each study, and then I looked for those themes. So 4 main themes I found emerged throughout the literature again and again. So they are athletic identity, stigma, social support, and mindfulness, and we'll review each one, which I included in my findings section. So athletic identity was the first one, and this is defined as the extent to which an individual identifies with the athlete roles. So it's really important for an athlete's self-concept. It shapes their motivation, their behavior, and their psychological well-being. And when athletes get hurt, the feelings could be anger, they could be sad, they could be very anxious, among many other feelings. And sometimes they can even become worried about their identity and how they kind of fit into the world after they get injured, especially a big injury or a career-ending injury. High levels of athletic identity can lead to what we called identity foreclosure, which I mentioned earlier, where athletes define themselves almost exclusively by their sport. So they will start to neglect other aspects of personal growth, such as academics, career exploration, or social relationships. Social media has further complicated this relationship between athletic identity and injury, as it serves both a source of support, but also a contributor to mental health challenges. In some cases, social media has provided a platform that allows encouragement, validation. People who or athletes who get hurt may be able to look online and relate to others who are going through a similar injury, and it can kind of reinforce those feelings of comparison. Injured athletes may experience distress when they see their teammates continuing to train and compete, which can also make them feel excluded from the team and can kind of increase that loss of athletic identity. So social media has that dual impact where it can either validate, but it can also heighten that identity loss. Stigma is the second one, which is defined as the perception that seeking help for mental health reflects personal failure. And it's very popular in athletic cultures where mental toughness is normally what is encouraged from those parents and those coaches. So, those sayings of just rub some dirt on it, shake it off, there's no reason to be upset, just keep moving on. And the stigma surrounding mental health continues to be a major barrier for injured athletes seeking psychological support. So a lot of athletes are struggling with their mental health, especially when they're injured, and they're not seeking out for advice or for help from anyone because of that kind of stigma that's surrounding sports. Many athletes will carefully curate their social media online presence. So when we're looking online at social media, we're only really seeing what we call the highlight reel, right? So they're only posting positive aspects about their life, their experiences, and they kind of avoid talking about those mental health struggles. And when you selectively only represent this about yourself, you're kind of creating an unrealistic expectation. And sometimes that can make injured athletes feel isolated in their struggles and reinforce the belief that they should suppress their emotions. Social support is the third one. So this one is also very important when we're trying to mitigate the negative effects of injury on athletic identity and overall mental health. So studies indicate that athletes who receive both emotional and informational support from coaches, teammates, healthcare professionals tend to report lower levels of distress and greater success at adapting to their new reality. However, a lack of social support can contribute to increased feelings of isolation, alienation, and negative self-perception, especially if athletes perceive themselves as being ignored or forgotten by their team. This highlights the importance of building a culture of care within teams where athletes feel valued beyond their performance and are encouraged to discuss their psychological well-being openly. So when athletes are getting hurt, the teams who are still including them at practice, maybe they're watching on the sidelines, they're still including them in, online chats and things like that, will kind of help athletes not feel so isolated and away from the team when they're going through an injury. And so the digital platform can help try to bridge that support gap. Mindfulness is defined by Jon Kabat-Zinn as the awareness that arises by paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And so research demonstrates that mindfulness-based practices are very effective for teens who struggle with emotional regulation, especially when confronted with unexpected disruptions to identity and routines, such as a sports injury. So, mindfulness is also being integrated into sport medicine programs to support performance enhancement and injury rehab. And so, when coaches and trainers and people who are in your life that model mindfulness, it gives value for both performance and well-being, and it helps athletes be more open to engage with the practice of mindfulness. So these are kind of the key themes that emerged, and now we're going to go into some digital wellness strategies. So once I looked at these themes, I said, okay, let's also research some strategies that can help support this. So the goal is to mitigate the risks, reap the benefits of technology and social media use, especially when these teen students are recovering from an injury. Digital wellness strategies that were explored are supportive online spaces, mindful social media use, and digital journaling. And the goal is to build emotional and self-regulation, develop coping skills, increase that self-awareness, especially around identity, and create some reflection skills. And these skills are very important for these adolescents, student athletes. So the first one is supportive online spaces. So social support is probably the strongest protective factor against post-injury depression and anxiety in student athletes recovering from an injury. Because social media is so prevalent in adolescent lives, we want to bring that supportive space online. And so, to create a supportive space online effectively, we want to involve the coaches, the parents, and that could help athletes feel supported and remain a part of that team. It would help foster a sense of connection. And this could be through chats on Messenger, it could be Facebook groups, it could be different apps that maybe the team uses, but kind of including that individual that's injured and that may not be able to train with the team can still help them feel a sense of belonging. And these online spaces could also allow injured athletes to maybe share their struggles, celebrate some progress within their rehab. They could ask for some advice from the healthcare professionals or the coaches without a fear of judgment, which could help reduce stigma and improve mental health outcomes in these student athletes recovering from an injury. This slide is just highlighting some real examples of how supportive online spaces can make a difference during injury recovery. So one of them that I found was a blog called Taking Back Control by Nima Faye. And she talks openly about the isolation she felt while she was injured and how maintaining a meaningful online connection helped her cope emotionally. Kimberly was a collegiate volleyball player. She shared in an interview that strength isn't always physical. And she talked about mental health and that side of recovery and how leaning on her support network really helped her through her injury recovery. And then Avery Peters from the University of Michigan, she tore her ACL and she shared on an Instagram video, and she was very open and honest about her experience. And she talked about how helping normalize these conversations around injury and mental health really could help future teammates, as she didn't have that while she was recovering from her injury. And these examples that I found kind of show how digital spaces, when it's intentional and supportive, can help reduce that stigma that's surrounding sport. It can foster connection, and it can become a meaningful part of the recovery process. So here are some core benefits of creating a supportive online space. So it's going to reduce isolation, as it's very important during injury, as many athletes suddenly lose their like daily team contact. When coaches and teammates engage with athletes online, it can build psychological safety, and athletes feel remembered, they feel valued within the team, and maybe they won't feel so alienated. Shared recovery stories also normalize struggles, which helps break down stigma. So if you're going through an injury, sometimes posting it online can help other people going through that same injury. And that consistent emotional support improves adherence to rehab and contributes to stronger long term outcomes. The second one is mindful social media use. So, this means being intentional and reflective with the digital platforms. So, this can help encourage athletes to become aware of how online content can influence their emotions, their thoughts, and their sense of self. Athletes could be taught to ask themselves, like, okay, what am I hoping to gain from social media right now? How do I feel after I just did 10 minutes of scrolling? And these questions can help cultivate self regulation and allow athletes to make intentional choices about their online behavior. Research also highlights the importance of media literacy education. So, helping athletes recognize that social media is very often curated, filtered, and idealized, and only the highlight reel is really being posted. And adding that education piece and trying to help foster mindful social media use among these athletes could aid in that intentional engagement online and reduce mental health struggles. And here are a couple examples. And they highlight the emotional impact of uncritical or mindless social media use during injury. So, Maggie is my first example. She was a NCAA field hockey player that talked about how daily online comparison made her mental health struggles worse. She explained that seeing other athletes performing, returning the play sooner, led her to feel inadequate, which delayed her for seeking help. And so Maggie actually didn't reach out for mental health support for 23 years. And so she is a very big advocate online because she went through that injury recovery process without support, not knowing how to properly use social media, and without that education piece. Dr. Marcy from UC Davis recommends that athletes avoid social media leading up to competition or games. So she has seen how negative comments on posts, comparison online, or distractions online can increase anxiety and harm their performance. And so this is a good example where even if you're not going through an injury, perhaps kind of being intentional with your social media usage and when you're using it can also make a difference. And these examples highlight that mindful and intentional use is very important online. Social media can either support recovery and make the emotional load, a little bit less, but the difference often comes down to how that social media is being used. Does the athlete have that education piece? Are they able to not have mindless scrolling, but a little bit of mindful use in their practice online? And this slide is about putting mindful social media use into action. So, small intentional habits can make a big difference. So, pausing before you open an app, setting clear intentions about why you're opening up the app, creating boundaries around timing. So, not spending so much time on the same social media platform, just scrolling mindlessly. And some examples could be avoiding late night scrolling, avoiding checking social media before a competition or a game. And it's also about challenging comparisons by remembering that much of what we see online is a highlight reel. It's not the full reality. And these strategies can help athletes protect their mental space during a vulnerable period like a sports injury. And my third digital wellness strategy is digital journaling. So, this offers student athletes a structured way to process their emotions, track their progress, so their rehab, and reflect on their evolving identity during recovery. So, self reflection practices such as journaling provide an outlet for athletes to explore their feelings, set goals, reframe setbacks, see some opportunities for growth. And there's a lot of research that shows that expressive writing as a tool to reduce psychological distress and improve emotional processing following a traumatic event is very effective. And that can be seen just like a sports injury. When we encourage athletes to use digital platforms for journaling, this practice could become familiar and provide a personal archive of progress so that athletes can see, wow, I've come really far in my injury recovery progress, and hopefully give them a little sense of hope. Some guided reflection prompts could include, what did I accomplish today? What's one thing I'm proud of this week? And this could help athletes begin their digital journaling process. And this digital wellness strategy is to help improve self-awareness and resilience in athletes. Here is an example of how digital journaling can play a meaningful role during injury recovery. So Avery, who was the soccer player I talked about earlier, who tore her ACL, talks on Instagram that throughout her rehab, she used digital journaling to document her progress and reflect on her emotions. And that helps stay connected with her identity as both an athlete, but also a person outside of sport. And sometimes an injury, I have found from personal experience, can allow you to look for those hobbies and those other parts of you that aren't tied to that sport specifically. She also spoke about how journaling became more than just a tracking her rehab, but it became a space for her to process setbacks, celebrate small wins, and express the feelings that are maybe not talked about in that team environment, especially because of the stigma around mental health. Her openness not only supported her own recovery, but it also helps normalize conversations about the emotional side of injuries for others who are following her journey. So when you put yourself out there on social media and you talk about these struggles, it can really be a supportive space for other athletes who are maybe going through a similar thing. And the reason journaling works is it's a really powerful tool, and the research really supports it. So it externalizes emotions, which helps reduce overthinking and stops thoughts from kind of like looping in your head. Putting feelings into words can give athletes a sense of distance and clarity. It can help you track progress over time. So whether that's physical milestones in rehab or emotional ups and downs through that roller coaster. When you see growth written down, it reinforces resilience and provides motivation, especially through tough phases of life, such as a sports injury. I also supports identity reflection because injuries can kind of shake an athlete's sense of self, and that journaling space can help explore who they are beyond their sport. It helps emotional regulation. Athletes can process their frustrations, their fears, and their success in a structured way rather than kind of bottling and keeping everything in. So lots of studies by Brenner and Davis and Al support these benefits, showing that reflective writing during recovery can improve mental well-being and coping skills. And we'll talk a little bit about it in the moderating variables, but sometimes even it, as an organization or a parent or a coach, if you can give these athletes some prompts, and I wrote a few examples there on the slide. So today I felt blank when I couldn't train because blank. One thing I achieved in rehab this week was blank. Without my sport, I am still blank. And giving these prompts to athletes and having them do the work may really help with that identity exploration outside of sport. I made a little slide here that just connects the three strategies. So supportive online spaces at the top, mindful social media use on the left, and digital journaling on the right. And they can be used as strategies individually, but I also design them so that they can work together. So that supportive online space creates connection and belonging. Mindful use builds intentional habits and emotional awareness. And then the journaling provides structure outlet for reflection and identity work. And at the middle of the triangle, I wrote three key outcomes, which is resilience, emotional regulation, and identity support and reflection, and how these kind of reinforce each other. So it's important to recognize that digital wellness strategies don't work the same for every single athlete, and their effectiveness will depend on some moderating variables. These are individual, social, and contextual elements that shape how athletes engage with digital spaces during recovery. So we have athletic identity strength, team culture and support, pre injury mental health status, digital media literacy, and then the stages and severity of that injury. So, athletic identity strength is the degree to which athletes derive their sense of self worth from their athletic role, will strongly influence how they perceive the injury and engage with the recovery tools. So, for these athletes, digital journaling or other reflective tools that prompt identity exploration beyond sport will be very beneficial. If we have athletes reflect on their academic goals, their social roles in their life, their future aspirations, digital wellness strategies can help expand self concept and reduce reliance on athletic identity alone. For athletes whose sense of self is heavily tied to their sport, injury can feel like an identity crisis, right? That identity foreclosure that we talked about. So, reflective strategies like journaling can be very effective to help them explore other parts of their identity and reduce over reliance on athletics alone. So, you can see here in the bottom, I put digital journaling and mindful social media use as ways that could help this component. The second one is team culture and support. So, the team environment plays a very, very, very important role in shaping how athletes engage with the digital wellness initiatives. So, in teams where mental toughness, silence around mental health, and avoidance of vulnerability are normalized, athletes may resist engaging with reflective practices like journaling, or they might view mindfulness as unnecessary or weak and not for them. So, in psychologically safe teams where coaches openly discuss mental health, they model digital wellness behaviors, athletes are significantly more likely to adopt and sustain positive digital habits. So, this is going to be a huge factor if athletes are willing to engage with the digital wellness strategies, depending on their team culture, their coach, and their parents, and what they see around them. Pre-existing mental health vulnerabilities also shape how athletes are going to respond to the strategies. So athletes with pre-existing anxiety, depression, if they have perfectionist tendencies, are more likely to struggle with emotional regulation post-injury. They may turn to social media as a maladaptive coping mechanism. And so for this group, the digital wellness strategies may need to be more structured. They may need to be monitored and maybe even include some additional therapeutic support. So the guiding or the guided journaling prompts would be really good for them. Mindfulness coaching, regular check-ins from coaches and parents, or some check-ins with mental health professionals could really help those individuals. Uh, Digital media literacy. So the athlete's ability to evaluate online content is a very big key moderating variable. So when you have a low digital literacy, it leaves athletes vulnerable to unhealthy social comparison, especially when they're recovering from an injury. Injured athletes who lack media literacy may view posts of successful comebacks and interpret them as realistic recovery timelines when a lot of the time they're not. And it could heighten feelings of failures because they haven't gone in there yet. And digital wellness strategies should teach athletes how social media algorithms work, why content is curated, how to interpret online recovery narratives with caution, especially when they're on social media online. The stage and severity of the injury. So, the stage of rehab also affects the types of digital wellness strategies that are going to be the most helpful. In the acute phase, so immediately after the injury, athletes may benefit most from basic coping skills like grounding techniques and emotional validation through supportive online spaces. As the recovery progresses into the middle phase, strategies like digital journaling for reflection and mindfulness for pain management may become more useful. And when we're in that return to play phase, managing anxiety around re-injury is going to be a big one. Maintaining balanced social media use to prevent unrealistic performance comparison may also become very important. It's also noted in the research that key transition periods, such as returning to campus, reintegrating with the team, trying new rehab milestones, are going to elicit the most emotional distress for that injured athlete. This highlights the need for phased, adaptable digital wellness interventions rather than a one size fits all approach. The severity and expected duration of the injury is also going to shape the digital wellness needs, right? So if somebody just sprained an ankle and it's going to take 4 weeks to rehab versus somebody who tore their ACL, MCL, and their knee and are going to need reconstructive surgery is also going to lengthen that recovery process, and they may need a little bit more digital wellness strategies. So very small, minor injuries, do a quick check-in, and it may help. And then those kind of season-ending, career-ending injuries have a lot more emotional processing behind it and are going to need a lot more social support. Athletes who are facing long-term absence from their sport is also going to disrupt their identity more. They're going to have greater social isolation, and it makes that consistent online peer support and structured reflection very essential. We want to tailor the strategies to match the injury severity that ensures that the athlete is receiving the right level of support at the right time through their injury recovery. This research highlights that social media can be both a risk and a resource during student-athlete injury recovery. On one hand, it can amplify comparison, isolation, and anxiety. And on the other, when it's used intentionally, it can foster support, reflection, and resilience for those athletes. And while this literature review did provide a foundation for understanding the relationship between social media use and injury recovery in student athletes, there are still several gaps that remain. So future studies should look at long-term impacts of the digital wellness strategies, especially when tracking athletes across different stages of recovery and different injuries. Research comparing different digital wellness strategies would help identify the most effective intervention based on the injury severity, the sport type, and the psychological profile. Some further research is also needed into the influence of social media algorithms on recovery mindset, given that curated content can shape athletes' emotional responses to injury. Research should also address other factors such as gender, socioeconomic status, access to digital resources, and how that impacts engagement with the strategies. Examining these elements will help develop a more inclusive and effective intervention, ensuring that these digital wellness strategies support a broader range of student athletes in their recovery journey. I also included this slide, which is some takeaway for parents. So these takeaways are geared towards parents, caregivers, perhaps even coaches, because their role during an athlete's injury can have a huge impact on recovery, both physically and mentally for that individual. So making sure you're keeping those lines of communication open. So making space for open, honest conversation about how is your child feeling, not just about their physical rehab, but their emotional state too, and a kind of acknowledging the emotional side of injury. Modeling healthy digital habits is also very important. So teens and adolescents will often mirror what they see. So if you're showing them mindful social media use, setting boundaries, not constantly comparing yourself, and taking intentional breaks away from your social media sends a powerful message to them. Encouraging participation in supportive online spaces. So this might mean helping them find a group. Maybe you're the parent who starts the team chat for the students that are on the team. Recovery communities where the focus is on connection and encouragement rather than competition if they are going through an injury, and you're kind of taking the lead to kind of help find those supportive online spaces for them. Validating their feelings and normalizing emotional ups and downs. So going through an injury I know firsthand it's kind of a roller coaster of emotions. So injuries are hard, and it's okay for them to feel frustrated, sad, feel left out. But acknowledging those emotions can be very supportive from a parent or a coach stance. Helping structure routines that include both recovery and rest is really important. So, consistency balanced with downtime helps athletes maintain a sense of control and normalcy during uncertain times. So, when they are healthy, their routine has training practices, school, they have games, and if you can keep a similar routine through their rehab, where they have scheduled rehab, they have scheduled digital journaling prompts, they're checking in with their teams, maybe they're still showing up for practice and they're just observing, can sometimes help them still feel a part of the team and feel included. And so this can help reduce that stigma around mental health. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Please let me know your thoughts, or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me online or on social media. And hopefully we'll see you around soon.